What happens when a prince realizes the crown no longer wants to fund him? It sounds almost unthinkable, almost like the stuff of tabloid exaggeration. But for Prince Harry, this is exactly the reality he woke up to one morning. His royal income abruptly cut, his financial lifeline severed, and his options narrowing by the hour. Imagine waking up, expecting the comfort and security that comes from being a royal, only to discover that the system you were born into now views you as expendable. What would you do? Who would you call? Where would you turn? These are not just rhetorical questions. They are the exact ones Prince Harry faced in the quiet, tension-filled corridors of his life. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story starts with a message. Not a casual note, not a friendly nudge, an official, sharp, and final notice from the palace that changed everything. Sources say that Harry read it multiple times, hoping each time that somehow, miraculously, he had misread the words. But it was real. King Charles had made his decision. The annual funds, the allowances that supported everything from security to household staff, the money that allowed him and Meghan to live with the dignity expected of royals, were gone. Shut down. Terminated. There was no room for negotiation, or so the official line suggested. But let's pause for a moment. Why now? Why did this come at a time when Harry and Meghan had already stepped away from official royal duties, already fought the press, already tried to carve a life of independence in the United States? Could it be that this was about more than just money? Could it be about power, control, or sending a message that no one in the royal family is untouchable, no matter the bloodline? These are questions that would soon consume Harry's mind, keeping him awake through long nights, wrestling with a mix of anger, disbelief, and fear. Sources close to the palace hint at whispers and conversations that would shock the public if fully revealed. They say there were 3 critical phone calls, each one more desperate than the last, and each one leaving Harry more frustrated, more humiliated, and more aware of the delicate balance of his position. One involved a cousin he had relied on in the past. Another involved a close advisor who had always seemed loyal. And a third involved someone nobody expected him to reach out to. Someone whose refusal to help would leave Harry completely exposed. These calls, these attempts to find an anchor in a storm, set the stage for a drama that would stretch far beyond the palace walls. Think about it. Harry has always been seen as the prince who could step into the spotlight, charm the world, and wield influence. He was celebrated, protected, and financially supported. Now, in a matter of weeks, he was being forced to confront a stark, almost humiliating reality. His royal title could not protect him from the very system he was born into. And the world, as always, was watching. But the emotional stakes didn't stop at money. There was the ever-present question of family loyalty, complicated by decades of tradition, unspoken rivalries, and unresolved tensions. Harry had to consider how his next moves would reflect on him as a son, a husband, and a father. One wrong step could escalate a minor dispute into a public spectacle of monumental proportions. And yet, the more he considered staying silent, the more suffocating the pressure became. Every day without a solution felt like a slow-motion crisis, one that the press was ready to magnify at the first hint of a misstep. Adding to the tension was Meghan, his wife, whose own instincts and ambitions complicated the equation. Sources suggest that Meghan's reaction was immediate and intense, partly protective, partly strategic, and partly frustrated at the lack of viable options. She is known for her decisiveness, and in this situation, she reportedly proposed a plan so bold that Harry hesitated, torn between caution and urgency. Their discussions, heated and private, would shape the first moves of this unfolding crisis, and the choices they made together would ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the decision to cut Harry off financially was not just about money. Sources say it was also a message. One that tested his resilience, questioned his loyalty, and measured his willingness to step outside the confines of royal expectation. The timing, the manner, and the tone all suggest that this was deliberate, calculated, and designed to provoke a reaction. And react he did. Privately, Harry was scrambling, reaching out to those he believed might have the influence or resources to help. Publicly, he maintained the calm, composed image expected of a prince. But inside, every minute was a battle against desperation. So how did it all begin? How did a prince, born into privilege, raised with expectation, and adored by millions, end up in a position where he had to plead for help? The answer lies in a combination of timing, personal decisions, and the inexorable pressure of a family empire that moves on its own terms. While the public often sees royal events as ceremonial, the truth is far more complicated and far more ruthless. Every financial decision, every public statement, every private negotiation can carry consequences that ripple through decades of history. And for Harry, those ripples were about to turn into waves. The first sign that things were about to escalate came quietly. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a leaked document. It was a subtle change in tone from the palace, a shift in communication that spoke volumes to those who knew how to read between the lines. The advisors, the aides, the insiders all recognized that Harry's financial support was about to be cut. And when he learned the truth, the initial shock quickly gave way to a mix of strategic thinking, anxiety, and ultimately, desperation. Every plan he had for independence, every arrangement he had made to create a self-sustaining life outside of the monarchy, suddenly felt inadequate. And then, the whispers started. Rumors that had been circulating quietly behind closed doors began to gain traction. Some said Harry had been warned months ago. Others insisted this was part of a larger scheme, a way to ensure that any step toward independence would come at a cost. For Harry, who had spent much of his adult life navigating the labyrinth of royal expectations, the realization was clear. He was no longer operating within the protective bubble of privilege he once relied upon. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Every decision now carried weight, and every move would be scrutinized. What many may not realize is that in the royal world, financial independence is not just about money. It's about power, leverage, and perception. Being cut off financially was tantamount to being stripped of influence. And Harry was painfully aware that how he responded would define not just his public image, but his personal sense of identity and purpose. Would he fight? Would he negotiate? Would he appeal to his family? Or would he seek help from outside forces, risking scandal, betrayal, and exposure? This is where the story truly begins. Not with the headline, not with the gossip, but with a single, desperate moment that would set off a chain of events few could have predicted. A moment where Harry had to confront not only the practical realities of life without a royal income, but also the deeper, emotional truth that the family he had always relied on might not be the safe harbor he imagined. And in that quiet, pressure-filled moment, the seeds of conflict, drama, and revelation were planted, seeds that would grow into a full-blown storm in the days, weeks, and months to come. So what did Harry do next? Who did he turn to when the palace doors seemed closed? And what shocking moves would he make in the days immediately following the financial cutoff? Those questions are not just tantalizing, they are the heartbeat of this story. And as we follow the unfolding drama, the stakes will grow higher, the tension more unbearable, and the revelations more shocking. But one thing is certain, the story of Harry's struggle is not just a tale of money, influence, or royal privilege. It is a story about family, loyalty, desperation, and the lengths one man will go to protect his life, his values, and his legacy. It began with a message, not a vague note, not a casual email, not something he could brush off. This was official, sealed in authority, a declaration from the very heart of the palace. Sources say that when Harry first read the words, he froze. The room seemed to constrict around him. It was as if the walls themselves were whispering, "This is real. There is no going back." The notice was simple, clinical, and utterly devastating. His royal income was officially shut down. No allowance, no discretionary funds, no safety net. What many people might dismiss as just money was for Harry the lifeline that allowed him and Meghan to live with the dignity, security, and independence their positions demanded. And now it was gone. For a moment, Harry's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. He reread the letter, hoping he had misunderstood, misinterpreted, misread the fine print. But each line confirmed what his heart already feared. The king had made a definitive choice. The funding was being withdrawn, effective immediately. There was no appeal process, no backdoor, no soft landing. In an instant, Everything Harry had assumed about his financial security, about his ability to live freely, was destabilized. It wasn't just the money. It was what the act represented, a sudden assertion of authority, a reminder that titles and bloodlines could not shield him from consequences. The message carried with it layers of meaning. It was financial, yes, but it was also psychological, a test, a rebuke, a message that independence would come at a cost far higher than he had anticipated. And if the money was gone, what else could the palace take? The thought was suffocating. Harry's first instinct was disbelief. He had grown up in a world of privilege and expectation, trained from childhood to trust in the structures of the monarchy. The family, the advisors, the titles, all of these had always seemed permanent, unshakable. Yet now, confronted with this stark reality, the carefully constructed fantasy of security dissolved in front of him. He was no longer the carefree prince who could rely on the system to provide. He was suddenly vulnerable, exposed, and acutely aware that every step he took from this point forward would be under scrutiny, not just from the palace, but from the entire world. But the shock was only the beginning. The realization quickly evolved into anger. How could this happen? Why now? The timing seemed cruel. He and Meghan had already taken enormous steps to distance themselves from the traditional royal roles, carving a life in the United States. They had made sacrifices, faced relentless media scrutiny, and endured personal attacks, all in the pursuit of independence. And yet, here was a reminder that independence came with a price he may not have been fully prepared to pay. As he sat in silence, sources suggest that Harry ran through the scenarios in his mind. Could he appeal? Could he negotiate? Could he find a back channel through an ally inside the palace? Each option, he realized, carried risks. Each choice was a potential headline, a potential scandal, a potential betrayal. He understood that even a misstep of intention could ignite a media frenzy, turning his struggle into public spectacle. The weight of the decision was almost paralytic. Amidst the storm of emotions, shock, anger, disbelief, and fear, a single thought kept returning. What would Meghan do? Meghan, always pragmatic, always decisive, was now a key factor in the unfolding crisis. Sources say that Harry immediately reached out to her, pacing in their home, phone in hand, heart racing. Their conversation reportedly began calmly enough, but quickly escalated into a heated debate. She questioned what he had expected, reminded him of their responsibilities, and suggested bold strategies to secure support. But these strategies came with moral and ethical complications that left Harry hesitant. He was torn. Pride told him one thing, desperation told him another. The palace, sources say, was already watching. Advisors were reportedly aware of Harry's growing anxiety, his phone calls, and the flurry of messages he sent seeking guidance. Within hours of the financial notice being delivered, rumors began circulating, quiet at first, whispered among aides, but growing louder by the hour. The leak of the palace decision was not immediate, but it was inevitable. And when the media caught wind, the narrative spun quickly. The prince cut off, the monarchy asserting dominance, the dramatic fallout ready to capture public attention. Harry's next steps were critical. Every action would ripple outward, affecting relationships, public perception, and ultimately, his own sense of agency. Sources indicate that in those first hours, he made 3 key phone calls, each more desperate than the last. The first, to a trusted cousin, seeking both advice and support. The second, to a former royal advisor, someone who had always been loyal but whose current stance was uncertain. And the third, most unexpected, to an ally outside the traditional royal circle, a move that some insiders would later describe as both bold and reckless. The reactions were immediate and telling. The cousin reportedly offered sympathy but little practical help, emphasizing loyalty to the family above personal intervention. The royal advisor, sources suggest, warned Harry of the potential fallout from making any public moves, urging caution and discretion. And the outsider, while initially receptive, placed conditions on any support, conditions that Harry would later describe as humiliating, yet unavoidable. These early interactions underscored the reality of his predicament. He could not rely solely on bloodlines or old alliances. He would have to navigate a complex web of personal relationships, political maneuvering, and media scrutiny, all while managing his own emotional turmoil. But even as he grappled with these challenges, a deeper, more unsettling question began to take hold. Why was this happening now? Was it purely financial, or was there a broader strategy at play? Some sources speculate that King Charles, in making the decision, was not simply cutting off funds. He was testing loyalty, asserting authority, and sending a message, not just to Harry, but to the entire family. It was a demonstration that titles and lineage could not shield anyone from consequence, that independence had a price, and that even the youngest generation of royals could be reminded of their place within the hierarchy. As the hours turned into days, Harry's initial shock gave way to a cold, focused determination. He began analyzing every possible route to regain control, every potential source of support, and every strategic move he could make. His public image, once a protective shield, now felt like a fragile veneer. Every step he took could either salvage his independence or accelerate his downfall. The palace, the media, and even his closest allies were all part of a delicate ecosystem, one in which one misstep could have enormous consequences. Meanwhile, Meghan reportedly took a proactive role. Sources indicate that she not only helped Harry think through strategies, but also began planning for contingencies. Her decisiveness reportedly clashed at times with Harry's hesitation, creating tension but also forcing rapid decision-making. Together, they were navigating uncharted territory, balancing public image, private emotion, and the very real practicalities of life without the security that had once been guaranteed. Even as they strategized, the story was quietly escalating. A palace aide, observing the unfolding tension, reportedly whispered warnings that Harry's moves were being monitored, that every call, every message, and every decision could be interpreted as either defiance or desperation. The stakes were immense, and the pressure unrelenting. Harry's emotional state, already fragile from the shock of the financial cut, was now tested in ways few could imagine. Sleep became elusive, every conversation was loaded with consequence, and every decision felt like navigating a minefield. And yet, even in the chaos, there were seeds of opportunity. Some insiders suggest that Harry, for the first time in years, began considering paths to genuine independence. Not just financial, but personal and strategic. The challenge was immense: how to reclaim agency, maintain dignity, and protect his family, all while under the scrutiny of a watchful palace and a ravenous media. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, and the prince, once shielded by privilege and expectation, was now forced to confront the stark realities of vulnerability. What drives a king to cut off his own son? At first glance, it sounds almost unthinkable, like something out of a royal drama scripted for television. But according to multiple palace insiders, this was neither impulsive nor personal. King Charles's decision to shut down Prince Harry's royal income was deliberate, strategic, and meticulously calculated. To understand it, one must peel back the layers of palace politics, decades of family tension, and the immense weight of legacy that sits on the shoulders of a reigning monarch. The decision, sources say, began long before Harry even knew it was coming. Advisors recall months of discussions, secret briefings, and financial projections that painted a stark picture. The younger generation of royals, while beloved by the public, was increasingly asserting independence, challenging tradition, and testing the boundaries of entitlement. Charles, now king, was reportedly determined to send a clear message. Titles, lineage, and blood alone would not guarantee support, security, or unchallenged influence. This was not merely about Harry's finances. It was about authority, control, and the preservation of the monarchy itself. In private meetings, Charles is said to have emphasized the importance of demonstrating accountability and responsibility. Sources describe him as calm, measured, and unusually resolute, insisting that Harry needed to understand the consequences of his actions, decisions, and public statements. Advisors recall Charles using language that was both firm and unyielding, a combination of paternal concern and royal pragmatism. He reportedly insisted that independence comes with responsibility, and that the privileges of royal life are contingent upon alignment with family expectations and adherence to protocol. But it wasn't just about money or lessons in responsibility. Insiders suggest there was a broader strategy at play, a long-term plan to recalibrate the royal family's image, consolidate authority, and reinforce the hierarchy in a time when public scrutiny and media speculation were at an all-time high. Charles understood that the public sees royals as symbols of stability, unity, and continuity. Any hint of division, financial reliance, or internal conflict could erode that perception. By cutting off Harry's income, Charles was not only sending a message to his son, but also to the broader world. The monarchy operates on principles of duty, accountability, and consequence, not entitlement or defiance. Complicating matters further, whispers suggest that outside advisors, legal consultants, PR specialists, and financial strategists also influenced Charles's thinking. These professionals, often unseen by the public, are charged with safeguarding the monarchy's reputation. They reportedly warned that continued financial support of Harry could be interpreted as favoritism, weakness, or a failure to uphold standards. According to insiders, these warnings resonated deeply with Charles, reinforcing the idea that a firm stance was necessary to preserve both family authority and public credibility. Meanwhile, other hidden forces reportedly influenced the timing of the decision. Sources indicate that Charles was aware of key media cycles, political considerations, and public sentiment. By acting at this precise moment, he could maximize impact, minimize sympathetic coverage, and assert control over the narrative. Advisors reportedly presented analyses predicting that Harry's financial independence would inevitably attract scrutiny, but if the cutoff were executed with precision, it would establish Charles as a decisive, authoritative monarch in the eyes of the public. Timing, it seems, was as much a factor as the decision itself. But there was an even more unexpected influence, a former senior aide who had maintained a subtle presence behind the scenes. This individual, sources say, had long been skeptical of Harry's independence and warned Charles that leniency could embolden further rebellion. Their advice, though quiet and often indirect, reportedly weighed heavily on Charles's mind. In palace circles, this aide is known for combining meticulous research with psychological insight, understanding not just the financial implications of royal decisions, but also the emotional and political ones. Their guidance, according to insiders, nudged Charles toward the final decision, decisive, public enough to send a message, yet discreet enough to avoid unnecessary scandal. Family dynamics, financial counsel, and hidden influencers were only part of the story. Sources also suggest that political considerations played a role. While the monarchy is officially non-political, it operates in an environment heavily shaped by government, public opinion, and historical precedent. Advisors reportedly highlighted the risk that continued funding of a semi-independent royal could provoke criticism from politicians, media commentators, and watchdog groups. By cutting off Harry's income, Charles reportedly aimed to preempt criticism, framing the move as responsible stewardship rather than personal punishment. For Harry, however, these hidden influences were nearly invisible. He only saw the consequences, the abrupt severing of funds, the immediate uncertainty, and the urgent need to respond. What he did not know, at least initially, was the full network of forces acting against him, quietly shaping his father's decisions. To him, the message appeared direct and uncompromising. You are on your own. The reality, insiders suggest, was far more complex. Every decision, every influence, every whispered warning had converged to produce a scenario in which Harry faced a crisis that was as much about family strategy as it was about finance. Even the advisors closest to Harry were caught off guard by the scope of the orchestration. Friends, confidants, and supporters reportedly scrambled to understand why Charles acted with such resolve, why the decision seemed sudden, and why the network of influences appeared so meticulously aligned. Some suggested that Harry's previous choices, public interviews, independent ventures, and his critiques of the monarchy had triggered a chain reaction that culminated in this decisive action. Others believed that the timing was purely logistical, a matter of aligning palace schedules, financial cycles, and media coverage. Either way, the impact was immediate, undeniable, and deeply unsettling. The emotional consequences were equally profound. Learning that multiple unseen forces had played a role in the decision reportedly left Harry feeling cornered, frustrated, and betrayed. If he had expected that his father's action was singular and personal, the revelation that it was orchestrated by a network of advisors and influencers intensified the sense of isolation. It became clear that he was not simply negotiating with one person, one decision-maker, or one authority figure. He was navigating a complex web of power, expectation, and hidden strategy. And yet, within this web, opportunities emerged. Insiders suggest that Harry began identifying potential allies, analyzing which influencers might be sympathetic and which could be persuaded. He began to understand that independence would require careful navigation, strategic communication, and selective engagement. But even as he strategized, the hidden forces continued to exert influence, ensuring that every move he made would be met with resistance, scrutiny, or complication. Perhaps most striking was the subtle psychological effect of these hidden influences. By carefully aligning advisors, timing, and messaging, the palace reportedly created an environment in which Harry felt urgency, pressure, and even vulnerability. Sources describe this as a deliberate strategy, not overt coercion, but a sophisticated orchestration designed to encourage compliance, test resilience, and provoke calculated responses. For a prince accustomed to privilege and support, this was both disorienting and instructive. It forced him to confront the reality that the monarchy operates on systems far larger than individual relationships or sentiment. As the days progressed, Harry's awareness of these hidden influences deepened. He began to recognize patterns in the advice he received, the reactions of palace staff, and the timing of communications. Each interaction revealed new layers of complexity. Each decision hinted at broader strategy, and each revelation added pressure to an already tense situation. The realization that he was facing a network of forces, rather than a single decision, was both intimidating and clarifying. It underscored the stakes, sharpened his focus, and prepared him for the difficult choices ahead. But perhaps the most dramatic element of this chapter is what Harry discovered next. A revelation that changed his perception not just of the financial cutoff, but of the entire dynamic within the royal family. According to insiders, he learned that the decision to cut off his income was influenced by individuals he had never suspected, people whose loyalty, discretion, or hidden agendas he had never considered. The shock of this revelation reportedly left him momentarily paralyzed, struggling to reconcile his understanding of family with the reality of hidden forces shaping his life. This was the beginning of a long, twisting path, one in which Harry would have to navigate the complexities of loyalty, strategy, and survival, all while under the watchful eyes of both family and public. Every conversation, every phone call, and every decision now carried weight far beyond what he had ever anticipated. The invisible forces that had orchestrated his financial cutoff would continue to shape his options, test his resilience, and challenge his assumptions at every turn. The moment the financial cutoff hit, Harry knew he had to act fast. There was no time for hesitation, no room for indecision. The palace doors seemed closed, the media scrutiny was immediate, and the stakes, both personal and public, couldn't have been higher. Sources say that within hours of receiving the notice, Harry made his first formal attempt to seek assistance. But this was not a casual phone call, not a simple email, not a conversation he could approach lightly. It was a deliberate, calculated plea, one that would test loyalties, expose vulnerabilities, and reveal just how isolated he had become. According to insiders, the first person Harry reached out to was a senior family member, someone he believed would act as both confidant and intermediary. The conversation, sources suggest, began cautiously. Harry reportedly tried to frame the discussion around practical concerns, security costs, household support, and maintaining a standard of living consistent with his royal position. But as the conversation progressed, the emotional undercurrent became unavoidable. Anger, frustration, and disbelief seeped into his words. "I'm being cut off completely," he allegedly said. "This is more than just money. It's a message, and I need guidance." The response he received was far from comforting. Sources claim that while there was sympathy, there was little practical assistance offered. The family member reportedly emphasized duty, loyalty, and adherence to protocol, reminding Harry that independence comes with responsibility. The subtext was clear. The royal hierarchy and the rules governing it were not negotiable. For Harry, this was a sobering realization. Even those he trusted implicitly were constrained by loyalty to the institution. Undeterred, Harry escalated his plea. The second call, according to insiders, went to a longtime advisor who had previously managed aspects of his finances and security arrangements. Here, the conversation reportedly became tense. The advisor, while acknowledging the seriousness of the situation, highlighted the potential consequences of making any public moves. Every step you take now is being monitored, they warned. One wrong word, one misstep, and the media will amplify it tenfold. For Harry, this was both a warning and a wake-up call. The palace, and the world, was watching. Every decision had to be measured, strategic, and precise. But the third call, sources indicate, was the most unexpected. This time, Harry reached beyond the traditional royal circle, contacting an ally outside the established network. The choice of this person surprised even those closest to him. It was a move that insiders describe as bold, risky, and, in some ways, desperate. The ally reportedly listened, asked probing questions, and offered conditional support, but the conditions, while practical, reportedly felt humiliating to Harry. He was faced with a choice: accept assistance on terms he found uncomfortable, or risk navigating a financial and political minefield alone. The emotional toll of these calls was immense. Sources suggest that Harry's frustration grew with each conversation. The combination of limited support, escalating pressure, and the knowledge that his every move was scrutinized created an almost unbearable sense of urgency. For a man who had spent much of his life under the protective bubble of privilege, this was a stark lesson in vulnerability. The realization that independence came with high stakes, personal, financial, and emotional, was unavoidable. Amidst this tension, Meghan reportedly played a pivotal role. Sources indicate that she encouraged Harry to consider all options, not just within the family, but also externally. Her pragmatism, assertiveness, and strategic thinking reportedly helped him navigate the complexity of his first plea. She reportedly suggested alternative routes for financial and operational support, even if they meant engaging with advisors, donors, or entities outside the royal sphere. According to insiders, this guidance was essential in helping Harry move beyond paralysis and take actionable steps. But the palace, sources claim, was already aware of these moves. Every phone call, every message, every hint of outreach was reportedly monitored by advisors tasked with protecting the monarchy's image. This knowledge added another layer of pressure. Harry had to secure help, but he also had to avoid any action that could be construed as defiance or public airing of grievances. Every conversation became a delicate dance, balancing urgency with discretion, need with diplomacy. Financial concerns were only part of the story. Insiders suggest that Harry's plea for help also included appeals for strategic guidance. He reportedly sought advice on how to navigate the complex web of royal expectations, media scrutiny, and family dynamics. How should he respond if the story leaked? How could he secure his independence without alienating allies? Which moves would demonstrate responsibility and prudence, and which could trigger further backlash? Each question carried weight, and each answer shaped the options available to him. Even as he reached out, sources indicate that Harry became acutely aware of the emotional dimensions of the situation. He reportedly felt a mix of frustration, betrayal, and isolation. The very people he had relied on, family members, advisors, and allies, were constrained by loyalty, protocol, or personal agendas. The stark realization was that while he had power in theory, in practice he faced a network of forces, some hidden, some visible, that limited his freedom to act. The financial cutoff had revealed vulnerabilities he had never fully appreciated, exposing both the fragility of privilege and the challenges of independence. Yet, within this crisis, Harry reportedly began to recognize opportunities. Sources suggest he started identifying which relationships could be leveraged, which allies could be persuaded, and which forces could be navigated to his advantage. His first plea for help, while not immediately fruitful, set the stage for more calculated, strategic action. It forced him to confront the reality of his situation analyze the landscape of support and resistance, and begin crafting a response that was both assertive and cautious. At the same time, the public dimension of the crisis loomed large. Insiders claimed that Harry was acutely aware that the moment he made his plea known, intentionally or inadvertently, the media would seize on it. The narrative of a prince cut off, seeking help, struggling against a system of power, was irresistible to tabloids, social media, and global audiences. Every interaction, every call, and every decision had the potential to become headline news, amplifying pressure, complicating strategy, and influencing the reactions of both the palace and the public. Despite the obstacles, sources suggest that Harry remained determined. The financial cutoff was not just a setback. It was a challenge, a test of resilience, and an opportunity to demonstrate agency. By making his first plea for help, he began to navigate the difficult intersection of family loyalty, public perception, and personal survival. He was forced to weigh the immediate needs of security, income, and operational support against the long-term implications of his choices. Every call, every message, and every decision now carried the weight of both consequence and opportunity. But perhaps the most dramatic element of this chapter is what came next. While Harry was reaching out for help, sources indicate that a shocking revelation emerged, something that neither he nor Meghan anticipated. An insider within the palace, someone with deep knowledge of the financial decision, reportedly sent a message, warning Harry of obstacles he had never considered. This revelation, sources say, was so unexpected that it altered the trajectory of his strategy, intensified the stakes, and set the stage for the next phase of the unfolding drama. In the days following Harry's first plea for help, an unexpected and shadowy figure entered the unfolding drama, someone insiders refer to only as the secret advisor. Unlike the visible courtiers, aides, and financial advisors, this individual was rarely seen, almost never acknowledged publicly, and operated with a level of discretion that bordered on secrecy. Yet, sources insist, the influence of this advisor was profound, shaping not only the decisions of King Charles, but also the strategies, fears, and options available to Harry and Meghan. The first hint of the advisor's involvement came in a discreet communication sent directly to Harry. According to insiders, the message was carefully worded, balancing warning with guidance. It reportedly began with an acknowledgement of the unprecedented nature of the financial cutoff, but quickly pivoted to a stark caution. The crisis was far more complex than it appeared. Every move Harry made would be observed, analyzed, and potentially countered. The advisor reportedly insisted that Harry must think strategically, prioritize discretion, and recognize that the palace was operating on a level of planning that extended far beyond immediate perception. Sources describe the advisor as highly intelligent, extremely well-connected, and deeply familiar with both the royal family's internal dynamics and the pressures of public scrutiny. Their guidance, while not overtly threatening, carried weight because it revealed knowledge of aspects of the palace operation that few outside insiders ever glimpse. From financial allocations to personal loyalties, from media strategy to subtle manipulations within the family hierarchy, the advisor painted a picture of a system far more complex and tightly controlled than Harry had imagined. The warning itself, insiders say, was chilling. It emphasized that any rash actions could have consequences far beyond the immediate financial cutoff. Not only could public perception turn against him, but private relationships within the family could be strained irreparably. Alliances he assumed to be solid might fracture, and even well-intentioned interventions could be weaponized by those seeking to maintain control. Essentially, the message was clear. Independence comes with risk, and the risks were far greater than Harry had realized. But the advisor didn't merely offer warnings, they provided guidance. Sources indicate that the advice included strategic recommendations for both communication and action. For instance, the advisor reportedly suggested ways to secure alternative income discreetly, methods for negotiating privately with sympathetic insiders, and approaches to controlling the narrative if the story were to leak to the media. Each recommendation was carefully crafted to maximize agency while minimizing exposure, reflecting a deep understanding of both the stakes and the chessboard upon which Harry was now playing. The emotional impact on Harry was immediate. Sources suggest that receiving this warning and guidance created a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief, because it confirmed that not all forces within the palace were aligned against him. Anxiety, because it revealed the scale, complexity, and subtlety of the forces he was up against. The cutoff of his income was not a simple punishment. It was part of a larger strategy, one that required careful navigation, intelligence, and resilience. The advisor's warning made Harry realize that he was not merely facing a financial challenge, but a multidimensional test of strategy, patience, and perception. Meghan, according to insiders, responded to the involvement of the secret advisor with a mix of skepticism and pragmatism. On one hand, she was cautious about trusting someone whose identity was opaque and whose motives were not entirely transparent. On the other hand, she recognized the value of the intelligence and insight the advisor offered. Together, Harry and Meghan reportedly began incorporating the guidance into their strategy, balancing caution with action, and gradually building a framework for navigating the financial and emotional crisis. However, the warning carried additional layers of tension. Insiders claimed that the advisor subtly implied that the financial cutoff was not only about authority and responsibility, but also about testing Harry's loyalty and judgment. The message reportedly suggested that the palace would be watching not just what Harry did, but how he did it. His tone, his discretion, his willingness to engage diplomatically rather than react impulsively. The advisor's influence didn't end with strategy. Sources suggest they also provided emotional support, framing the financial cutoff not simply as a punitive act, but as a catalyst for empowerment. The guidance reportedly emphasized that resilience, intelligence, and careful planning could turn a seemingly negative situation into an opportunity for independence and control. While the advice was pragmatic, it also carried an undercurrent of psychological reinforcement, helping Harry and Meghan to manage the stress, fear, and uncertainty generated by the palace's decision. Yet, the secrecy surrounding the advisor created its own complications. Harry reportedly struggled with questions of trust, reliability, and potential ulterior motives. Could this person truly act in his best interest? Were there hidden agendas at play? Insiders say that these questions loomed over every interaction, forcing Harry to weigh each recommendation carefully, verify details through other channels, and consider the broader consequences before acting. The need for caution was immediate, and the stakes could not have been higher. At the same time, the advisor reportedly provided insight into hidden factions within the palace. Sources indicate that some courtiers were sympathetic to Harry's situation, others were neutral, and yet others actively sought to reinforce Charles's position at Harry's expense. Understanding these dynamics, the advisor reportedly warned, was crucial for any strategy to succeed. Identifying allies and anticipating opposition became a central part of Harry's planning, adding a layer of tactical sophistication that he had not previously needed to consider in such detail. The secrecy of the advisor's involvement also introduced tension in the broader narrative. Sources claim that rumors of the financial cutoff had begun to leak, and the existence of this hidden counsel was both a potential asset and a vulnerability. If public knowledge of the advisor's guidance emerged, it could be spun by media outlets as evidence of behind-the-scenes maneuvering, fueling speculation and controversy. Harry and Meghan were therefore faced with a delicate balancing act. Using the intelligence, insight, and strategy provided by the advisor, while ensuring the secrecy of the guidance remained intact. Perhaps most importantly, the advisor's warning illuminated a critical truth. The financial cutoff was not merely about money or authority. It was about the dynamics of power within the royal family. Sources suggest that the advisor emphasized the ways in which perception, loyalty, and narrative shape reality. By framing the situation as a test rather than a punishment, they reportedly helped Harry and Meghan recontextualize their challenge, encouraging them to approach the crisis with strategy rather than emotion, foresight rather than reaction. Even as they absorbed this guidance, sources indicate that a new complication emerged. The advisor reportedly revealed information suggesting that additional actions, yet unseen, could be forthcoming from the palace. Steps that might further complicate Harry's ability to maintain financial stability and personal autonomy. The implication was clear. The situation was fluid, unpredictable, and potentially escalating. The window for thoughtful, strategic action was narrow, and any misstep could have cascading consequences. This revelation forced Harry to confront the gravity of his predicament. He was no longer facing a single, isolated challenge. He was navigating a complex system of hidden influences, family dynamics, media scrutiny, and strategic manipulation. Every decision mattered, every interaction carried risk, and every misstep could reverberate far beyond the immediate crisis. The financial cutoff had become a crucible, testing not only his judgment, but his resilience, foresight, and ability to act decisively under pressure. And then came the most shocking part. Sources suggest that the secret advisor delivered one final, chilling piece of guidance. A warning that if Harry miscalculated, he could inadvertently give the palace justification to escalate further measures. Actions that could compromise not only financial security, but public perception, personal reputation, and even the fragile trust between father and son. The stakes, it seemed, had just reached a new level. For Harry, this warning marked a turning point. It forced him to acknowledge the full complexity of the situation, recognize the subtle forces shaping the palace's actions, and begin crafting a response that accounted for both immediate needs and long-term strategy. It was a moment of clarity amidst chaos, a realization that the crisis was about far more than money, and that the path forward would require intelligence, patience, and unyielding resolve. But as he processed this revelation, a new, unexpected variable was about to emerge. One that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the secret advisor, the palace's intentions, and the true nature of the financial cutoff. This development, insiders suggest, had the power to escalate the conflict to unprecedented levels, catching even Harry and Meghan off guard. No crisis in the modern royal family is complete without the relentless glare of the media, and Harry's financial cutoff was no exception. Almost immediately after the news leaked, even in the vaguest of terms, headlines began to appear, each one escalating the tension and magnifying the emotional stakes. Sources say that within hours, tabloids, online publications, and social media accounts were spinning a narrative that was part fact, part speculation, and entirely sensational. The media storm had begun, and there was no way to escape it. The first wave of coverage was subtle, almost insidious. Initial articles framed the situation as Harry facing independence challenges or Prince Harry's allowance under review. At first glance, these headlines seemed tame, but insiders suggest that the subtext was clear: a royal in trouble, a palace enforcing authority, and a story that begged for dramatic embellishment. Public perception, experts note, began shifting almost instantly. While many sympathized with Harry's position, others questioned whether his previous choices had warranted such a financial recalibration. The narrative was being constructed before Harry even had a chance to respond. Within 24 hours, the media coverage intensified. Tabloid headlines became bolder. Prince cut off. Royal son left in financial limbo. King Charles enforces tough love. According to insiders, the wording was deliberately provocative, designed to stoke curiosity, attract clicks, and frame Harry as both vulnerable and controversial. Each article, social post, and broadcast segment added layers to a narrative that combined drama, tension, and high stakes. The story was no longer about money alone. It was about loyalty, family conflict, and the very survival of Harry's royal identity. Sources indicate that Meghan, as always, played a strategic role in navigating this storm. She reportedly monitored media coverage closely, identifying patterns, highlighting inaccuracies, and developing counter-narratives. She is said to have encouraged Harry to remain calm, measured, and deliberate in any statements or responses, emphasizing that reactive moves could be weaponized by the media and the palace alike. Her guidance reportedly helped Harry manage the emotional impact of constant scrutiny, although the pressure remained immense. Insiders described the effect of this media attention as psychologically taxing. Harry reportedly found himself constantly thinking about the potential reach of each headline, the implications of each viral post, and the ways in which his private actions could be spun into public controversy. Every phone call, every meeting, every decision carried amplified weight. The media had transformed a financial cutoff into a public drama, and Harry was now caught in the middle of a narrative he had little control over. The coverage also drew attention from the international press. Sources say that major publications in Europe, North America, and beyond began reporting on Harry's situation, often with dramatic interpretations of his financial independence. Some framed him as a victim, others as a privileged royal learning a harsh lesson. The story quickly became a global talking point, with pundits, commentators, and social media users dissecting every detail. For Harry and Meghan, this meant that their crisis was no longer contained. It had become a spectacle, with pressure coming from every direction. Complicating matters, insiders suggest that some media outlets began digging into the hidden influences behind Charles's decision. Reports hinted at advisors, family members, and unnamed palace figures exerting pressure, fueling speculation about palace politics and internal power struggles. While much of this reporting was speculative, it heightened tension, made trust more difficult, and placed Harry in the delicate position of responding, or choosing not to respond, without revealing strategy or vulnerabilities. According to sources, the media storm also influenced internal palace communications. Advisors reportedly monitored coverage closely, preparing talking points, framing narratives, and considering potential responses to maintain public perception. The palace, it seems, was acutely aware of how information traveled, how rumors spread, and how perception could influence both public opinion and family dynamics. Every headline, every viral post, every news segment was analyzed, and the analysis reportedly influenced subsequent decisions regarding Harry's situation. For Harry, the constant media attention compounded the emotional and logistical challenges. Insiders say he struggled with frustration, helplessness, and the pressure to act decisively while remaining strategic. The financial cutoff was no longer just a personal or family matter. It had become a public spectacle, subject to interpretation, judgment, and manipulation. Every step he took could influence not only his financial and personal future, but also public perception of the monarchy, his father, and even his own reputation. Yet, the media storm was not entirely a disadvantage. Sources indicate that it provided opportunities for strategic action. By carefully managing statements, using allies in media, and timing appearances, Harry could influence the narrative, highlight injustices, and draw attention to broader issues. He could, for instance, frame the story as a test of resilience, independence, or integrity, subtly shifting public perception without violating the secrecy and strategy imposed by the palace. The storm also tested relationships and loyalty. Insiders report that some allies, previously assumed to be supportive, began acting cautiously or withdrawing, fearing association with a controversial story. Others doubled down, providing advice, support, or discreet channels for communication. The media, in this sense, acted as both adversary and catalyst, forcing Harry to evaluate alliances, test judgment, and recalibrate strategy in real time. Emotionally, the impact was undeniable. Sources suggest that Harry experienced a mix of frustration, fear, and defiance. The relentless coverage amplified the sense of isolation, yet also fueled determination. He reportedly began thinking more strategically, considering not just immediate reactions, but long-term consequences, and developing a roadmap for navigating the crisis while maintaining both dignity and agency. The media storm, in other words, was a crucible, refining strategy even as it threatened to expose vulnerabilities. As the coverage escalated, insiders claimed that a particularly shocking report emerged. One that mischaracterized Harry's situation, implied secret financial dealings, and questioned his loyalty. The piece, widely circulated across digital and print platforms, reportedly had the effect of intensifying pressure from all sides: the palace, the public, and within his own circle. According to insiders, this moment marked a turning point, forcing Harry to recognize that media management was as critical to survival as financial strategy. In response, Harry and Meghan reportedly developed a multi-layered approach. They began identifying sympathetic journalists, crafting narratives for private channels, and leveraging media insight strategically. Sources say that this approach, while cautious, allowed them to regain some sense of control and agency. It was no longer just about reacting to headlines. It was about influencing perception, shaping the narrative, and protecting both personal and family interests in the face of relentless scrutiny. Yet, even as they executed this strategy, insiders hint at an emerging complication. A leak within the palace, a whisper of information that threatened to escalate the media storm beyond anything Harry or Meghan could anticipate. This leak, sources say, was subtle but potentially explosive, containing details of the financial cutoff, internal discussions, and the involvement of hidden advisors. The implications were clear. Even carefully managed media strategies could be undermined, forcing Harry to consider next-level contingency planning. And just as Harry began implementing these strategies, preparing statements, and assessing allies, insiders indicate that another unexpected twist was on the horizon. One that would elevate the stakes, challenge assumptions, and push both Harry and Meghan to confront realities that had previously been hidden. As the media storm reached a fever pitch, Harry quickly realized that the real battlefield was not only outside the palace walls, but also inside them. The corridors of power were teeming with figures whose loyalties were far from absolute. Allies could turn cautious, confidants could hesitate, and whispers could evolve into betrayals. Sources suggest that Harry began to understand that navigating the royal family's inner dynamics required as much strategy, discernment, and psychological insight as managing the public narrative. The first signs of shifting alliances appeared subtly. Individuals who had previously offered support suddenly became ambiguous in their advice. According to insiders, some longtime aides who had championed Harry's projects now hesitated to take definitive action, citing concerns about protocol, family loyalty, or public perception. This ambiguity, while not overtly hostile, effectively created obstacles, forcing Harry to question assumptions he had long relied upon. Every gesture, every word, and every message had to be weighed for hidden meaning, intention, and potential consequences. Compounding the challenge was the realization that some allies were not neutral, but actively working in the palace's favor. Sources indicate that certain advisors, while ostensibly sympathetic, were subtly reinforcing the narrative that Harry needed to comply with the cutoff, testing his reactions, or even strategically leaking information to media outlets. This covert influence created a sense of constant scrutiny and subtle manipulation, leaving Harry and Meghan to navigate a web of motivations that was both invisible and pervasive. The emotional toll of this dynamic was profound. Insiders claim that Harry felt a mix of frustration, disappointment, and isolation. Trust, he realized, was a fragile commodity. Individuals he had once counted on as allies were now viewed through a lens of caution and skepticism. Every conversation had the potential to reveal ulterior motives, hidden agendas, or incomplete truths. The very people who were supposed to guide, protect, and advise him had become variables in a larger, unpredictable system. Yet even in this environment, sources suggest that Harry began identifying genuine allies, those whose support was unwavering and whose guidance could be trusted. Among them were individuals with long histories of loyalty, deep understanding of royal protocol, and discreet access to information. These allies provided not only practical advice, but also emotional reinforcement, helping Harry maintain resilience in the face of uncertainty, pressure, and subtle undermining. They served as touchstones, offering clarity, insight, and strategic counsel amid the fog of palace politics. However, the presence of allies did not eliminate the risk of betrayal. Insiders report that at least one trusted confidant crossed lines in ways that were unexpected and consequential. While details remain unclear, sources suggest that this betrayal involved the selective sharing of information with palace figures who were not entirely supportive, potentially exposing vulnerabilities, undermining trust, and complicating Harry's strategic options. The psychological impact, insiders say, was significant. A sense of vulnerability compounded by the realization that misjudging relationships could have far-reaching consequences. The complexity of these dynamics forced Harry to reevaluate his approach to communication and decision-making. According to sources, he began implementing stricter protocols, vetting information, confirming the motives of individuals, and testing loyalty before taking any action. Every interaction became a calculated move, designed not only to secure support, but also to identify potential risk mitigate exposure, and protect both personal and strategic interests. This vigilance, insiders suggest, was both necessary and exhausting, reshaping his understanding of the very nature of influence within the royal family. Meghan reportedly played a critical role in managing these shifting alliances. Sources indicate that she encouraged Harry to remain analytical, to recognize subtle cues of loyalty or duplicity, and to prioritize action over reaction. Her guidance, insiders suggest, emphasized the importance of strategic patience, emotional composure, and selective trust. Together, they began mapping the landscape of support and resistance, identifying patterns, and preparing contingency plans for potential betrayals. One particularly surprising revelation, insiders claim, involved a figure long considered neutral or even supportive. According to sources, this individual reportedly aligned, at least temporarily, with palace advisors to reinforce the message of financial independence, an act that could have been perceived as betrayal. The subtlety of this maneuver, insiders suggest, was part of a broader pattern of influence, illustrating the complex interplay of loyalty, self-interest, and perception that governed the palace's internal dynamics. Yet even as they navigated this minefield, Harry and Meghan reportedly found ways to leverage allies strategically. Some individuals were enlisted to discreetly advocate for Harry, share information, and counteract subtle pressures within the family. Others were tasked with monitoring communications, observing palace behavior, and identifying emerging risks. Sources describe this network as carefully orchestrated, blending discretion